I can no longer sit back and allow communist infiltration, communist indoctrination, communist subversion.
They say even our gold at Fort Knox is no longer there. It's all been assembled in deep vaults in Geneva, Switzerland. So just what is this piece of paper worth? It's not worth silver anymore. It's not worth gold. Well, it's worth whatever the Federal Reserve says it's worth. By printing more of them, as they did during the presidency of Jimmy Carter, they decreased its value. The more dollars there were, the less each was worth. Or they can print less of them. They can constrict the money supply. They can call these in on loans. And then they can cause a depression. Mr. Alan Greenspan, who presently is the chairman of the Federal Reserve Board, he wrote an article in 1958, and he said that the Federal Reserve manipulation of currency, or the money supply in the 1920s, is what brought on the stock market crash of 1929. And Mr. Greenspan says, quote, caused the American economy to collapse. Our lives, our fortunes, and our honor today are at the mercy of the Federal Reserve Board. And I'm sure most of you think that it's just another government agency. The Federal Reserve System is no more a part of our federal government than is Federal Express, the overnight package delivery people, or the federal dry cleaners. The Federal Reserve System is a private corporation owned by private individuals. It is a secret corporation. It is so secret, it is the only corporation in America that does not have to publish the names of its principal stockholders. Every other business corporation in our country has to have on file a list of its principal stockholders that are open to public inspection. The only private corporation that doesn't have to do this is the Federal Reserve System. So we don't even know who owns it. It's the most secret, mysterious corporation in America. And it's probably owned by the international bankers, by the Rothschilds and the Warburgs and the other international bankers, to whom we American taxpayers owe the national debt. You know, sometimes the press will tell us, well, don't worry about the national debt, we owe it to ourselves. Well, if we owe that national debt to ourselves, why do we have to pay $100 billion a year in interest on it? Though that national debt is owned by international bankers. And this is how the Antichrist will gain control of the world. Now, every corporation in America is open to audit by the federal government. In 1978, a congressman introduced a law in Congress to audit the Federal Reserve. It's never been audited. But he wanted to find out what they're doing with all our money and why they've imposed this tremendous debt on the American people. By the time that law got through Congress and was passed, it said just the opposite. The Federal Reserve may not be audited. That tells you the control the Federal Reserve has over our Congress. That it can take a law introduced by a congressman and make it come through exactly opposite to what was intended. Though the Federal Reserve System is part of that great deception of which St. Paul spoke in his letter to the Thessalonians. In other words, it's a central bank that controls all the other banks in our country. And did you know that a central bank is the third plank of the Communist Manifesto, written by Karl Marx in 1848, nearly 150 years ago? If you have never read the Communist Manifesto, I would urge you to go to a large public library and get a copy. You're in for the shock of your life. The first plank of the Communist Manifesto is a federal income tax. Karl Marx was the first one to propose a federal income tax on all wage earners in a country. The second plank is to substitute paper money for real money of gold and silver. Everything that Karl Marx laid down for the economic enslavement of a nation is already in place right here in America, including women's liberation, the destruction of marriage and family life for the sake of so-called women's liberation. Even this is spelled out by Karl Marx. So where is the reign of the Antichrist in the world today? Well, it's in Russia, where you have the economic enslavement of an entire people. It's in China, where these people are nothing but slave laborers for the Communist Party. The reign of the Antichrist is in Cambodia, where 3 million Cambodians were slaughtered by their own government. It's in Vietnam, it's in Laos, it's in Poland, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, and right here in the United States. We are under the Communist Manifesto already. And this is what Daniel warned us about. He said most people would be totally unaware that they were being taken over by the Antichrist. When did our beloved America fall under the control of the Antichrist? We know the exact date. January the 23rd, 1973, when our Supreme Court enacted the death penalty against 20 million helpless babies in our country by abortion. This was a sign that we had fallen under the control of the Antichrist. Whenever the devil gets control of a nation, and I don't care where it is, he demands human sacrifice. That is the price that those who give themselves to the devil must pay. According to Solzhenitsyn, the communists have already killed 66 million of their own people in Russia, either through war, execution, or slave labor camps. That is the price that the communists paid to Lucifer and to his Antichrist. So where is the reign of the Antichrist today? Well, practically 2/3 of our planet has already been subjected to his power and authority. And as far as the rest of the world goes, it is just a matter of time. The World Bank will see to it that every other nation is brought to its knees through inflation, through a huge national debt. Everybody will be enslaved to this World Bank, whose chief executive is the Antichrist. The Bible and tradition also warn us that the agents of the Antichrist will infiltrate the Catholic Church and will take over its visible structures. I'm afraid this is what we are seeing today, not only in America, but throughout the world.
Today I'd like to take a moment to discuss the difference between what the theory of communism is versus the reality of communism. A lot of times you hear people talking about communism, and really what they're talking about is dictatorship or totalitarianism. In the theory of communism, Karl Marx built upon this political theory of socialism. From that political theory, he wrote the Communist Manifesto, which outlines his plan to get to the ideal utopian society. He said there were 3 phases. The first phase is revolution. You have to have a revolution that overthrows the existing government. The second phase in communism is that you have a leader who collectivizes. That means they take everything everybody has and puts it all together. The third phase is the achievement of utopia. Now, in history, the third phase has technically never been completed. This would be where everyone has everything in common, everyone is equal, and they share everything together. If we look at communism as it is known, we are dealing with up to the second phase. We have a revolution, and then we have a leader that comes along and takes everything and puts it in this big pot, and everyone shares it together, only not really. Most communist societies, if not all communist societies in history, have been dictatorships, totalitarianistic dictatorships. This means that they have a leader or a dictator that comes along and takes everything together and holds it, and they control everything. They control education, they control religion, they control marriage, they control housing. The dictator decides who does what, when does what, and usually in the actuality of communism you have a very high amount of terror and fear being used. So in theory, communism is everyone working together in a perfect utopian society where everyone shares everything and everyone is equal. Communism, the reality, you have somebody telling you what to do, when to do, and how to do it all the time. And if you don't do it exactly how they want, they'll kill you. Hope you have a great week. See you next time.
Communism in the last 50 years. It's the professors, it's the educationalists, it's the journalists. They are the shock troops, the Gramscian shock troops of the future.
And one of Gramsci's all-star disciples, Saul Alinsky, became one of the most influential radicals of the 1960s.
Well, Saul Alinsky was a prominent radical in 1930 Chicago. He worked closely with the Communist Party. He used to go down and train at the rifle range with Leon Dupre, who was later a mentor of Barack Obama. And they used to train to shoot because they knew the revolution was just around the corner. But that didn't come, so he got a bit more subtle.
Well, Saul Alinsky called for a community organizer to stir things up, to create agitation. In fact, he said, you'll be accused of being an agitator, and that's exactly what you are. He wanted the haves and have-nots fighting with each other.
It wasn't until I was watching an old film from World War II that I realized what the left has been doing in America to pit the poor against the rich, blacks against whites, and the young against the old is the same tactic Hitler used to disunify Germany.
You see, they knew that they were not strong enough to conquer a unified country. So they split Germany into small groups. They used prejudice as a practical weapon to cripple the nation. Remember that when you hear this kind of talk. Somebody's going to get something out of it, and it isn't going to be you.
And they use the conflict as justification for more government to stop the chaos. So they create the chaos, and then they step in as a solution to the chaos. And as Francis Schaeffer said, once this chaos comes, most people will willingly give over to an authoritarianism because they don't want the chaos.
His book was kind of the field manual, if you will, for these activist organizations.
Which President Obama studied and taught at a workshop for 4 years in Chicago as a community organizer for Acorn.
As I was reading through Rules for Radicals to see where he was coming from, I just happened to take a look at the dedication in the front of the book. And this is what I saw. Quote, "Lest we forget at least an over-the-shoulder acknowledgement to the very first radical, the first radical known to man who rebelled against the establishment and did it so effectively that he at least won his own kingdom, Lucifer." Unquote. Saul Alinsky from Antonio Gramsci has had an incredible amount of influence on our president and on our society, and he dedicates his book openly to Lucifer? Satan? I think that says more about where their ideas and plans are based than anything else.
You asked what Saul Alinsky's impact is on the leftist movement today, and it basically defines it. It defines it.
In recognizing a communist, physical appearance counts for nothing. If he openly declares himself to be a communist, we take his word for it. If a person consistently reads and advocates the views expressed in a communist publication, he may be a communist. If a person supports organizations which reflect communist teachings, or organizations labeled communist by the Department of Justice, she may be a communist. If a person defends the activities of communist nations while consistently attacking the domestic and foreign policy of the United States, she may be a communist. If a person does all these things over a period of time, he must be a communist. But there are other communists who don't show their real faces, who work more silently.
May Day brings a wave of anti-communist sentiment as 100,000 march down New York's Fifth Avenue in a loyalty parade. Everyone from vets to youngsters reveals his inborn dislike of communism. A united answer to those menacing our country's liberty.
A part of that plan, of course, is to induce the gradual surrender of American sovereignty, piece by piece and step by step, to various international organizations, of which the United Nations is the outstanding but far from the only example. Now, here are the aims for the United States. 1, greatly expanded government spending for every conceivable means of getting rid of ever larger sums of American money as wastefully as possible. 2, higher and then much higher taxes. 3, an increasingly unbalanced budget despite the higher taxes. 4, wild inflation of our currency. 5, government controls of prices, wages, and materials, supposedly to combat inflation. 6, greatly increased socialistic controls over every operation of our economy and every activity of our daily lives. This is to be accompanied naturally and automatically by a correspondingly huge increase in the size of our bureaucracy and in both the cost and reach of our domestic government. 7, far more centralization of power in Washington and the practical elimination of our state lines. There is a many-faceted drive at work to have our state lines eventually mean no more within the nation than our county lines do now within the states. 8, the steady advance of federal aid to and control over our educational system, leading to complete federalization of our public education. 9, a constant hammering into the American consciousness of the horror of modern warfare, the beauties and the absolute necessity of peace, peace always on communist terms, of course. And 10, the consequent willingness of the American people to allow the steps of appeasement by our government which amount to a piecemeal surrender of the rest of the free world and of the United States itself. So brush the insider's dust out of your eyes, my friends, and the communist soap suds out of your brain, and ask yourselves in all honesty, what on earth is wrong with the United States simply minding its own business? Or with having its foreign policy function primarily for the safety and benefit of the American people. Which is exactly what we had done for the first 140 years of our existence as a nation, to the incredible advantage of ourselves and everybody else. Everybody, that is, except a numerically small clique of power-lusting conspirators who had somehow inflicted themselves on a gullible world. While we turn to a very brief summarization of what we hope the John Birch Society will help and even sometimes lead the American people to accomplish during the next 15 years. 1, our first and most important specific undertaking should be to restore the complete independence of the United States. This includes our resolution to get us out of the United Nations and get the United Nations out of the United States. Two, we must once again make our money freely redeemable in gold at some realistic price. And we must take all practicable legislative steps to prevent a recurrence of the enormous thievery and other subversive crimes that have been perpetrated on the American people through a contrived inflation by every president from Franklin Roosevelt through Richard Nixon. 3, we should reduce the number of government bureaus, of government civilian employees, and the whole quantity of government by at least 50%. And we should achieve at least this much reduction in proper fashion through gradually convincing a majority of the American people of the wisdom of such a course. 4, we should withdraw all American troops from every spot on earth that is not American soil, except when and where such troops may be required as decided by Congress to protect American lives and property from criminal vandalism. 5, we should get government out of the areas and functions and activities where government does not belong. Again, all steps to this end should be taken gradually, but nevertheless just as rapidly as enough of the American people can be persuaded to support such progress. Any such achievement will require a truly massive educational force, but that's exactly what we hope to build during the next 15 years. We could go ahead for at least 100 numbered items, but the John Birch Society will undoubtedly be working on more than that many specific projects, which will be laid out in its bulletins before another 180 months will have rolled around. And all of these projects will fit into the general pattern indicated by the 5 major objectives listed above. So let's really wind up this marathon monologue with one final thought. None of us can guarantee anything about what the future will bring. Your speaker knows what a job we have before us to rid our country of the scourge of communism within the next few years, and then to go ahead on our constructive program so well that 15 years from now we shall already be entering an era of far less government, of a much sounder sense of responsibility, and, with God's help, of a better world. But I sincerely believe that it can be done, and this much I know. If every man and woman in this audience should leave here tonight feeling in his or her own mind and heart that it can and must be done, then it surely will be. And so, all of you patriots of good character, good conscience, and noble ideals, whom we can reach with the filmed version of this speech in 1,000 other audiences, it is with a great deal of confidence and energizing will to win that we invite you to join us in our epic undertaking. While to all of you great, wonderful friends in this present audience, I certainly extend my very deep thanks indeed for so much patience and attention. Thank you and good night.
Every American will be required to carry one. Required is another word for forced. According to this bill, come 1999, all employers will be required to receive authorization from the federal government before hiring any new employee. The social planners are forcing you to get their permission before you can hire anybody. And your name has to be on their database to even get a job. Do you want your name on their database? They'll tell you from here to doomsday. They're defending your liberties. They're lying! Don't listen to what they say. But pay very close attention to what they do.